Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast.
Welcome to the second season of the Sleeping Barber podcast. We have an amazing guest. It's Jennifer Riel, who is the partner and global head of strategy at IDEO, former professor of strategy at the Rotman School of Business, and co-author of Creating Great Choices. And as you might have guessed, we're going to talk about how to make great strategic choices.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
On the show today is Jennifer Riel. Jennifer, thanks for being on the show. This is so exciting for us to talk to you.
My pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is great. So, big reason why you're on the show today is you wrote a book, co-authored a book with Roger Martin called Creating Great Choices, which is so, it's on the surface, it's like, okay, create a great choice. But it's such an important part of what happens in every single day of our lives. And so we want to explore that book because there's so many great nuggets in there. You spent 13 years teaching strategy at the Rotman School of Business as a professor, adjunct professor. Currently, you're the partner, a partner and global head of strategy at IDEO. And you've published articles in HBR, Strategy Magazine, Global Mail. I mean, if ever there's somebody to ask about how to make a great choice, I can't think of anybody better. So thanks for being on the show.
It's my pleasure.
So I don't know if this is the right way to think of it, but it seems to me like creating great choices is really, I think, a form of thinking. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to think about ways to frame this in a little bit. And when I think about thinking, there's like Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats that you hear about, Porter's 5 forces, or systems thinking and design thinking. And then I started thinking about the overlaps between design thinking from IDEO and the integrative thinking principles from Roger Martin and yourself in the book. Is there are those things related at all?
Yeah, I think they're very related. I think of them as sister disciplines, related disciplines that you can use in different moments for different purposes, but that have some core skills and mindsets in common. Mm-hmm. So if we start with design thinking, popularized in many ways by IDEO, but certainly with roots going back much further than IDEO's 40 years. The way I think about design thinking, when Tim Brown started to help define it in the world in an article in HBR, he talked about design thinking being the ability to bring a designer's mindset and toolkit to the problems that you're working on, and being able to think about problems from the perspective of desirability. Does a user want it? Mm-hmm. Viability. Can it make business sense? And feasibility. Is it technologically possible? But for me, the big contributions of design thinking to the world are really 3 things. One, the idea that innovation can begin with real human beings. Mm-hmm. Not with a data set, although you certainly can do that, but with actual real people and their real needs. So empathy as the root of innovation is one big contribution of design thinking to the world. The second big contribution of design thinking to the world is the idea that you are not, certainly early on in the process, looking for the answer. You're looking for many possible answers, the value of divergence, to look across the landscape and not quickly narrow or converge on a single solution would be the second big contribution of design thinking. And the third and final big contribution of design thinking, in my view, is the idea of tangibility being deeply, deeply valuable to innovation. That taking ideas from your mind as early as possible, turning them from ideas into something that can be experienced, touched, smelt, felt, lived, to help you understand what that idea is, but also to help you test it. And that sort of iterative testing loop that we see in Agile and many other methodologies really has its roots in this idea of tangibility, testability being deeply tied. So if that's design thinking, if we think of it as being bringing those particular design mindsets and tools to the challenge of innovation, integrative thinking is after the same objective. It wants a better answer than we started with, but it begins with a different point. So most decision making, might argue all decision making, is a process of weighing trade-offs. Right? Mm-hmm. This or that. What can I live with? What am I happy with? How do I make sense of the choices in front of me? And lots of times when we're making a decision, we look at the trade-offs and there is a superior answer, an answer that solves the problem. And our job is to choose that, bring people along, make our decision, then move on with our lives. Integrative thinking is a tool for those moments where you look at the trade-off and you say, whew, no, not good enough. The choices on the table, I'm not able or willing to make the trade-off. If I make the trade-off, I will lose. Mm-hmm. And so I need a better answer than I have now. And integrative thinking holds that you can begin with the tension between opposing ideas. That can be the starting place for your problem-solving methodology. And you can work your way through those opposing models to help you create a third and better way. So not a compromise halfway between where you're sort of taking some of the good and some of the bad of the two opposing models, but something that creates new value, that moves out the frontier and builds new value in the world. And so similar mindsets, we do have a mindset of divergence. We do have a mindset that says understanding multiple perspectives, having empathy is incredibly useful. And over the years, we've started to get more and more engaged in the idea that tangibility, testing, and learning can be really, really helpful for integrative thinking as well. So the steps are a little bit different, but the intention of creating an answer that didn't exist when you started is the same. And some of the mindsets are similar.
Let me just double click into that a little bit. And, do you think it's important that individuals are actually distinguishing between the two models? Because I do understand the overlap. I do see, how it actually works together and whatnot. But do you think it's important that you actually distinguish them and say, okay, now I'm moving here or I'm not?
I mean, I think it's useful in the sense of when you are seeking to follow a process with a group, right? Right. They are different steps. You are following a different methodology. Again, you want to have a mindset that is open to exploration and open to tangibility, empathic. All of those are the same. But a design thinking methodology is going to follow a different set of steps than an integrative thinking methodology. Right. Both very, very useful. But you might say design thinking is best equipped when you are trying to invent something. It could be a product, a service, an experience, an organization. You're trying to create something that doesn't exist in the world, or make an existing product service better than it is today. Design thinking is extraordinarily useful in that context. Right. Integrative thinking tends to be more in a decision-making context. We have a choice to make as an organization, a problem to solve. Right. And so we want to use this methodology to help this group of individuals solve that problem together, right? To see whether a better answer is possible.
Yeah, I think what you just articulated there really kind of painted a different picture for me in my head. So it's a lot more clear now. That was great. Thank you. If design thinking hinges on the questions of what might be, then would it be a fair statement to say that integrative thinking hinges on the question, what would have been true, or what would have to be true?
So what would have to be true is a question that comes from my mentor, Roger Martin. Probably the most important contribution he's made to the world of creative problem solving. He really grounds that in strategy. So he sees that as a fundamental strategy question. Right. When you are trying to figure out which strategic option to follow, you can ask, what would have to be true for me to choose possibility 1, 2, or 3? And that's going to help you understand the conditions under which you would choose each of them. So an extraordinarily powerful and important question that we use in the integrative thinking process. I think for me, the core question of integrative thinking is a little more fundamental even than that, which is how might we take the best of these two opposing models and create something new? So there is that sort of initial how might we that we hold in common with design thinking, those 3 magic words, how might we? But often in design thinking, how might we is how might we meet this need? How might we create this new thing? And in integrative thinking, it tends to be about how might we integrate? How might we bring the best of these models together to create new value?
Right. Hey, flashing back to one of the calls we had with Roger, and I remember him saying, like, you have to fall in love with ideas, and then especially ones that you would not normally like, because there's good things there. And I remember that being such a weird, at the time, weird for my own brain, thinking like, why do I have to fall in love with an idea? Like, I don't understand that. But as I read your book and started thinking more and more about integrative thinking, I appreciate it more, and how might we take the best from the two is maybe less a more specific set of instructions as opposed to falling in love with two different ideas. But it's interesting for a whole bunch of reasons, because I see this in myself all the time, where you just want to move into action. You go, we're just doing this, like. Yeah. I'm flashing back to my wife also going, I don't need you to do anything. I just want you to listen. And so, but it's funny when you get like into business, there's always like, what's the quick wins? What are we doing? Like, what's the action plan? And so it's almost like, the low hanging fruit. Exactly. Yeah. And it's almost like there's not time to fall in love with ideas and to explore ideas and to spend time. How might we do? Take the best out of that. Is that a pressure that you see that's common, or is that something that you can get around?
I mean, I think in some sense it's a false pressure. So there is no doubt that organizations are biased to action and to moving quickly, and some kinds of organizations, startups, technology companies, even more so. But my observation is this. I think many teams, many organizations seek to move quickly to an answer, and then they spend a huge amount of time and effort trying to get the organization on board and trying to bulletproof that solution, and then trying it and it fails, and so they have to fix it. And so the time frame from making the decision, framing the problem, making the decision, and then effective action is actually quite long. And with integrative thinking, what we're saying is, okay, we're not asking you to extend the time period from framing the problem to effective action. We actually believe using integrative thinking can shorten the time frame from framing the problem to effective action. But we do want you to spend just a little more time coming up with an answer that actually solves the problem. Really, seeking to understand the possibilities in front of you and seeing whether a better answer could be possible. And even with that said, the amount of time we're talking about, companies spend months of, years of person hours every strategy cycle, right? And so we're saying, what if you spent 6 hours with a project team seeing if there's a better answer than you have right now? I did a session for a big multinational not that long ago on a very tricky, complicated supply chain issue that had ethical and legal implications. It was incredibly complex. It had been something that the company had been working on for many, many years, and had put together this cross-functional team of like brand folks and legal folks and supply chain folks. And they had just been arguing with each other for months because they held such different perspectives about what mattered in solving this problem. Right. And we decided, we would spend, it was 6 hours over 3 weeks together, going through a process of saying, okay, what really are the two opposing models for solving this challenge? We're going to try and fall in love with each of them collectively. You don't each get to argue for the one you already love. We are together going to try to fall in love with each of these perspectives. We're going to examine those models. We're going to try to question our assumptions. We're going to think about what's truly valuable. We're going to have a different kind of conversation. And then we're going to see if we can generate a third and better way, a solution that is better than the two choices you've been arguing about for months. And then figure out, okay, how do we move forward? How would we test this? What are the next choices? And 6 hours, it was, pretty high level team at this company. That's not a nothing investment of time. But at the end of it, you could see, one, if nothing else had happened, the two camps now understood each other's perspectives in a totally new way, right? Because they had unpacked the answer, we should get out of this, we should stay in this, right? To a level of understanding and assumption and values. What is it you value that you see in this model that now I can understand in a different way? And had generated not like the greatest solution in the history of the world, but a solution that was meaningfully better than simply choosing one of those options and leaving half of the team behind. So 6 hours, I mean, that's maybe a heightened example, but it's not months and months. It honestly isn't. It's finding some dedicated heads down thinking time, which, the more senior you get in organizations, often it can feel like you get less and less and less thinking time. But actually, thinking is what the company is really paying you for. And so figuring out how to carve out some space to think together with your team is extraordinarily important, both for the state of your business, but also for developing the other leaders on your team. It's such a gift. If you think about the moments you've had time with a leader you really admire, to have that messy meeting, think together with that person and understand their problem-solving approaches, what a development opportunity, right? What a moment for people to learn from their peers and their bosses and the people around them. So that is a long answer to what was your short question about how long it takes. But I'm clearly passionate about this. I think that we make excuses for why we don't have time to do the things that matter. And this for me is one of those things that matter.
I want to, so Marc and I also worked together in a previous life, and actually that's how we met and shared passion in marketing and digital. And one thing that we were talking to, again, Roger Martin about is the fact that, we couldn't recall a time that we were in these annual strategic meetings that we weren't actually doing strategy at that point. And, where I'm going to go with this question is, well, where do you think the actual, maybe friction is not the right word, but where's the problem organization that doesn't allow or give that space to their leadership team to actually engage in that active thinking process and really kind of, start putting into motion some of these bigger ideas, because everyone falls in love with the rear view mirror and what's happened in the past. And I think, one of our old leaders would always say, you can't drive the car forward if you're constantly looking in the rear view mirror. And a lot of these companies are comp driven. It's like, well, last year we sent an email on this day, we did this, we just do the same thing. And I think that becomes kind of the problem. But what are you seeing as you're kind of venturing and you're working with a lot of organizations?
So I think it's a kind of a fundamental problem with the way we've structured our economy. Like, it's not an easy fix, right? But we have a very
that sounds like something we could do today.
Yeah, let's fix it. We have financialized our economy, right? Yeah. Businesses are geared to think about their stock price today, this week, in relative terms, as you said, V, like thinking about comps to last week or last year, which means that when we face this fundamental tension between focusing on the urgent today, this week, this quarter, and truly looking further out to the long run and building for the future, every incentive in the organization, no matter how well-intentioned the organization is, tends to be around the quarter, because we have to meet our numbers. Right. And the markets aren't very kind to you saying, we're not going to make our numbers because we're investing in the long run. And so we have defaulted to this very short run, planning oriented, optimizing to short run share price kind of perspective within organizations. And it's why I see the companies that often do the best with strategic planning, with thinking and building for the long term, are not public companies. They tend to be companies that are closely held or family owned, mutualized sometimes, because they don't have that same pressure to focus on today's stock price.
Great point.
So that's one thing that I think is what drives us to treat what should be a strategy and a long range perspective as a very tactical, initiative-led, short-run perspective. I think the other big thing that maybe is more addressable by individual organizations is certainty. So human beings deeply love the feeling of closure, right? So, people who make to-do lists, the feeling when you cross the thing off, right? There's a little reward in your head. And I will admit, I know no one else would ever do this, but sometimes I will put a thing on the to-do list that's already done.
This is a virtual high five.
Right. So I can have that feeling of like validation that I did the thing.
I do that.
So we love, great. It's not just me.
It's not just you.
We love closure and we love certainty. And when we're talking about the future, those things are impossible.
Right.
Future hasn't happened yet. You cannot have closure and you cannot have certainty about the future. And if you come into a strategy process with a desire for certainty, with a desire for true closure, you are going to really, really struggle to perform well in that. And so, when Roger and I talk about strategy, when we at IDEO talk about strategy, we try to move folks away from thinking about certainty to thinking about confidence.
Right.
So you can have more or less confidence, even in times like now of great uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 months or year or 18 months of our economy. Inflation, global conflict, supply chain shocks, COVID continues. Who knows what is about to happen? But there are things I can be more or less confident about. And I can make choices in light of the levels of confidence that I hold. And I can design my choice making to be geared at building evidence, future evidence that can help build confidence, as opposed to, as V said, backward-looking data that's all about sort of understanding the past and admiring the problem, as opposed to actually solving it.
Yeah, there's so many, so many great things that you just said since we started. But one thing that popped in my head as you were talking about is the design thinking squiggle. There's like that, chaos thrashing at the beginning, and then it kind of smooths out as you get towards the end. I don't know if this is true, but it feels to me that it is. That from what you're saying, that design thinking squiggle is kind of like, whether it's with design thinking or integrative thinking, it's about trying to bring that chaos forward in the process of decision making so that it happens earlier rather than later. Because in my mind, I don't know if this is true, but it seems to me that it will happen one way or another. And it's painful if it happens at the end.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I think that's fair. I think that one of the famous IDEO diagrams that made its way out into the world over the last 20 years is one that's sort of a chart about failure. So beginning of the project, end of the project, the cost of failure goes up extraordinarily, right? And so the argument that IDEO has always made is build failure in early when it's really cheap, right? Yeah. You haven't invested very much. You can still learn from it because your ego isn't involved, right? Yeah. So you're actually designing little tiny experiments early on so that you can still learn from them. And I would say what you're articulating is another version of that, which is the chaos of complexity, moving that forward rather than trying to deal with it at the end. Because there's always going to be complexity once you start to roll things out to the organization, right? Because human beings are complex and they respond in all kinds of different ways. And so figuring out how to engage in a consideration of tensions early rather than waiting for the very end for people in the organization to say, I hate this idea for the following 18 reasons, and needing to follow these incredibly challenging change management methodologies because you haven't considered the opposing points of view. Bringing that forward and really considering it early on is a big part of what we're talking about.
Yeah. And I like the idea of bringing failures. Yeah, you're right. It is cheap when you do it early. If you do it at the end, it is really can be insanely costly and probably put a lot of companies out of business. When you were describing the integrative thinking process and making a great choice or creating a great choice, it also occurred to me that it's a form of, like in that example you had of the groups of people you brought together, it's a form of active listening. It almost were. And then I also was thinking about the pro chart, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more later, but by forcing people to look at the positives or fall in love with ideas, it kind of removes that, well, I don't like that because, or, that's a stupid idea, or, you know what I mean? It forces you to like find common ground in a way. Is that true?
I think so. I mean, one of the intellectual forefathers of this work is a man named Chris Ardress. Chris was a management professor at Yale and at Harvard, and he did a great deal of work on thinking about organizations and their design and how people learn. He wrote a great HBO article, Teaching Smart People to Learn. And many of the principles that he brings in to our work are really about how we engage with and understand other people. So active listening is half of the battle, right? You need to really genuinely engage with other people and their ideas, bringing empathy to the conversation, seeking to understand their point of view, being genuinely curious about what they believe and why they believe it. The other half of it, though, is metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking.
Yeah.
What do I believe and why do I believe it in a way that it is auditable for you? You can engage with it and understand it, but you can also share it with others so that they can challenge, engage, advance, build on, right? So it is really in the combination of the ability to understand and share your own thinking and seeking to understand other people's points of view through active listening, great questions, empathy, that you are able to gain a richer understanding that enables you to move forward.
It's interesting because there's another idea that I had where sometimes you have like teams that oppose each other. They sit on opposite sides of a table and they go, you, or they just keep pointing fingers back at each other. And then I've thought about this a few times where it's like, if we can get people thinking about a problem or an issue or a situation as the opposition as opposed to each other, then you can align together a bit more. And the way you describe what you were just saying, it made me feel like the metacognition part, if you detach you from how you're thinking, it seems like that's a way to create that common objective of solving that problem, rather than it being, well, it's my idea, you're attacking me. It's just it's a form of thinking that got us here.
Yeah, we want to decouple people from ideas, right? We want to move away from this idea is mine and that idea is yours, because what tends to happen, and this is true in organizations, but it's also true much more broadly in the world, and you can watch this play out in politics and across the spectrum. Typically, when we encounter someone who holds a different perspective than we do, our default, this doesn't make you a bad person that you default to this, it just makes you human. Our default is, I am right. Yeah. Because I have understood this problem and this is the answer and it feels intuitively correct to me. And so I'm sitting across from you, Marc, and you have a different answer. and in fact an opposite answer. That makes you wrong. And wrong people are dangerous, right? My job is really clear in a world where I am right and you are wrong, Marc. My job is to make your answer go away.
It's that certainty part.
It's that certainty part. And typically, fairly or unfairly, consciously or unconsciously, when we're sitting across from someone who disagrees with us, we put them into one of two buckets. We say, here's a person who hasn't thought hard enough or isn't capable of thinking hard enough, and so they are simply wrong. And so we treat that person as stupid or naive. Or we might say, this person is capable of thinking hard enough. They, in fact, do know the right answer. They are choosing to argue for the wrong answer because they must benefit in some way. So now they're not stupid, they're evil, right? And we treat people in these ways. And I'm using intentionally provocative language, but think about the conversations that happen between marketing and finance in an organization.
Sure.
Right? Marketing saying to the finance folks, like, if you really cared about the customer like we care about the customer, you would understand why we have to spend this money.
Right.
And finance saying, well, if you could count, you would know that we can't. Right. Which isn't obviously an exaggeration, but
not that far from the truth. Like, I totally get it.
And these silos exist because we're talking across models. And so we do want to be able to depersonalize the models. We want to be able to say, okay, here is a model, here's another model. And maybe even we'll push them out to be a little more extreme than really anyone in the room thinks is the answer. So if we're trying to decide, should this be something we centralize or should this be something we decentralize? And most people are arguing for some compromise. I might say, all right, what would it look like if we completely centralize this? Everything happened at head office. It was all designed for scale, completely centralized. And what would it look like if we totally decentralized it, all in the field, all about agility and responsiveness? Let's try to understand and fall in love with those two models. The people in the room are able to do that as a group because no one feels that's my model and it is being critiqued. I am being criticized, right? The reason we found that you needed to begin by considering or falling in love with the two models rather than critiquing or doing a pro and con list is that it just enables people to stay in a space of possibility longer. It enables them to imagine a better answer versus sort of being demoralized or feeling defensive about the models that are on the table.
Yeah, that's awesome. In the book, there's this great visual I just wanted to reference because in the book you kind of go into like, looking for examples and I think you've asked people over the years and gotten examples of some really interesting integrative thinkers. And one that was shocking to me, but I think if somebody submitted the idea of Jay-Z being a great integrative thinker.
A student of ours wrote an essay and talked about Jay-Z, the rapper, Sean Carter, as an integrative thinker, and it was delightful to me, and so it made its way into the book.
Yeah, and so there's this line in Renegade, I have it here, it's, before I die, no lie, just know I chose my own fate. I drove by the fork in the road and went straight. I just love that line.
It is a great line, and he goes on to talk about like the choice that he faced growing up in poverty in a high crime neighborhood. I think the way he put it is I could either have dope in my pockets or lint in my pockets. And like that's a hard choice. And so like, how did making a choice to make art about his circumstance, about the world he came from, enable him to come out of that and find a different answer?
Why do you think that's such a interesting example of the creating great choices and integrative thinking?
I just think we tend to think of this as something, people will say, oh, it's, A.G. Lafley, CEO of Procter & Gamble, or it's Jack Bogle, founder of Vanguard, like these lofty, incredibly thoughtful, CEOs, and certainly Jay-Z has become an incredibly successful, thoughtful CEO over the period.
Mm-hmm.
But the kind of choice he was talking about wasn't an organizational choice. It was a very deeply personal choice with extraordinarily high stakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm intrigued by that as we were seeking to teach integrative thinking to all kinds of different folks. Yes, to our MBAs and our executive MBAs, and
Mm-hmm.
but also to kids and their teachers, and to folks from all different walks of life. And those kinds of choices are really interesting to consider, that it's not just about a business problem, but it could be about the choices you're making in your life.
Yeah, because I did notice that there's quite a bit of work. I forget what school board it was from that I kept stumbling around on the Creating Great Choices framework. But there's a school board where you've worked with them obviously and integrated it within their curriculum.
There's a few, actually. The Toronto District School Board, which is, I think, the third largest school board in North America, Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, a number of others across Ontario, a number of independent schools where they really have leaned into the idea of teaching teachers about this. So we learned pretty quickly there wasn't a lot of scale in us trying to teach kids. Plus, we're not teachers. Nothing but respect for anyone who can spend all day, every day in a room full of 14-year-olds. It's not me. But, we could give these tools to educators, and they could then figure out, how does this apply in my grade 12 English class? How does this apply in my grade 7 science class? And we've seen such remarkable and fun applications that we would never have been able to consider.
In some ways, I imagine if you can teach kids and it becomes a sort of practice, it becomes something that they're like, if you go to swimming lessons, you just get better at making great decisions because you've had practice at that. And just as you would have having gone to swimming, you get better at swimming. So it's a really interesting book in that it's not, I love it because it's kind of like a how-to on breaking down, like it doesn't have to be insanely complicated. These are not things that that aren't accessible to people. And it's really interesting that you've applied it to like extremes where it's on one end, the P&Gs of the world, and the other end, it's the grade 6 class in, Hamilton, which is interesting.
One of the cool things we learned is kids are naturally better at this, or learn it more quickly. And I think it's because they have less unlearning to do. They don't have that same long history that we all get through our education and our career of being told there's a single right answer. Our job is to find it quickly and then defend it. Right? We are so well trained in that, and it takes a long time to unlearn it. And kids are able to say, "Oh, wait, you're saying there's not a single right answer." And we thought that would be very scary for children. That at first we were worried that they would sort of panic a little bit that, well, if there's no right answer, how can I get an A? But it was actually unlocking for them, particularly for children who had been afraid to voice their perspective in class because they were afraid of being wrong. We heard from a lot of those children that, well, I am going to be wrong, but that's okay because everybody's going to be wrong. Right. So why can't I share my answer? And it's just joyful. But
but that's liberating in some ways because there's also, I know a lot of people in business, myself included, that there's tons of times where I'm like, I'm not going to say anything because I know the answer's wrong, or introverts, or just being afraid of whatever, for whatever reason, just afraid of speaking up. But then it's that answer that could have solved the giant problem for people that you're missing out on.
As we often say when we're doing brainstorming at IDEO, the reason we want to have a rule in brainstorming of no judgment of other people's ideas, of your own ideas, is that it may not actually be the idea you share. It's what it might inspire in someone else.
Sure.
Right? What they might build from what you share. And so what we want to do is get people to say the silly idea, the wild idea, the crazy idea, and go too far because we can always come back from there. But it does take a certain degree of comfort that it's okay to share something that's half-baked or a quarter-baked or barely baked, because that's the rule of the game. That's going to be how we get from where we are to where we need to be.
And so in that line of thinking, then, I mean, there's the title of the book, which I found really interesting. Like, great choices is one thing, but creating great choices is interesting. And then taking that creating word and looking at the contents of the book, creativity is a big part of it, which you don't necessarily think of or associate with like a CFO or a CEO or anybody in the C-suite really being creative, other than if it were like, I don't know, Johnny Ive maybe. What's the connection there, and why do you think that creativity is so important in the process?
I mean, I think creativity is one of the most important skills for literally all humans across all contexts. But I think we often confuse creativity and artistry. So the ability to draw well, the ability to make something beautiful, whether it's a piece of music or writing, or So artistry is valuable in and of itself. It is important to the world. Creativity for me is a little different. Creativity for me, I will massively lower the bar on what creativity is. The ability to imagine something is different than it is. Right? To think of a potentially better answer tomorrow than we have today. That's creativity for me, right? We all have that ability. It does get trained out of us, and so we have to practice it and build that muscle. But when we called the book Creating Great Choices, it was to say, so many people talk about making choices, which is accepting the trade-off, making the tough decision. The buck stops here, embracing the trade-off. And integrative thinking says, what if my job wasn't to choose, but to create, to build a better answer than we have today? Then that's a different skill set that is complementary to the skill set that we all learn early on around how you make a decision, assess, make the trade-off. This is about saying, what are the steps you could go through as a group to actually have a better chance of creating a new answer that didn't exist.
Yeah, I keep coming back to this thought about time and the pressures that people are facing. And so when you think about creating and creativity, there's the idea, and it's probably just a default. I keep thinking about painters or artists of some kinds where there's like this, you get writer's block, or you get like the creative process, and you just see the creative struggle that people go through. And I think in some ways in business, you look at that as going, that's totally inefficient. That's not the way we were. We know we make good decisions. It's that action oriented thing we were talking about earlier that I keep coming back to. And so there's so many choices that you could make. Like, how do you know which choices to spend the time on creating better ones?
Do the answers on the table solve the problem? Right? So if the problem can be solved and it's just about bringing people along, it's great. If it's a low cost decision or an easily reversible decision, right? Fine, make the choice, right? If you're deciding what to have for lunch, just decide. Don't try to find the integrated solution, right? Integrative thinking tends to be when those answers aren't good enough, when it doesn't solve the problem, and where the answer matters, right? Where you're trying to do something important. So we see companies apply it on their strategies. We see them apply it in really important investment decisions, people decisions, right? That are hard to reverse, that matter for the organization, and that they've been struggling with. So there may be organizational challenges that, if you think about your company, where you feel like you keep having the same conversation over and over, we keep coming back to it, we keep trying to solve the problem, that's a really good signal that you need integrative thinking. Or if you feel the organization is in a pendulum swing, right? So we tried to be totally centralized and it didn't work. So then we totally decentralized and it didn't work. So now we're centralizing again. It's like, okay, that's the definition of insanity. Remember when it didn't work last time? Like, what is it that would lead you to believe it will work this time? So those kinds of circumstances where the answers just aren't giving you what you need, that's where integrative thinking can be valuable. But it's also, I don't want to create a sense that it's this incredibly comprehensive, detailed process. Integrative thinking is also a way of being. It's a mindset you bring to interactions. You and I are going into a meeting, and I know, based on my past experience, that you and I often disagree, that we often have different perspectives. What is my default response when you disagree? Is it defensiveness, doubling down on my perspective and trying to convince you that I'm right? Or is it curiosity, openness, a willingness to seek to understand what you see that I don't see, to share how I'm thinking about it and invite you to engage in that same consideration, which could be a 3-minute conversation over the course of our sort of working relationship that can change the dynamic of our relationship from one that is adversarial and combative to one that is more collaborative and has more genuine connection or value between the two of us. So yes, integrative thinking can be a process you follow with a team, but it can also be an intention or a mindset that you bring to just be more open to opposing perspectives or to people who see the world differently than you do.
I used to work with a guy that you just made me think of. He was the smartest guy that I worked with. Everybody referred to him as the smartest guy in the company. But whenever you were in a conversation with him, like it got to the point where it was just so automatic that I heard this comment that he would say that now I'm thinking about it. But anytime that there was a conversation, his default was always, "Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more." Like he didn't judge anything. And it was like, that's really fascinating that he does that all the time. Like that's just who he is. He was just always so curious to learn things.
So that is my cheat officially. People who work with me will tell you, if someone says something I don't understand or I disagree with, and I'm not quite sure how to inquire specifically, I will default to saying, exactly, that's interesting. Say more. Like that. And so now everyone knows that means I am like confused or disagree. But it is an invitation to say, like, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm there. Like, help me understand, say more, tell me more about how you're thinking about it. There's a generosity to that that can be really valuable in relationship building, but also in just advancing your own thinking.
Yeah. It creates, I think one of the things you said before, it helps you build a list of possibilities that you didn't previously understand, probably.
I think so.
So if you don't mind, I want to try that. We were talking about this before. We're going to try this little experiment, if you're up for it. There's a whole bunch of things in marketing, and you brought up one of them, like marketing saying, "Hey, finance, we need some more cash to do the things that we're trying to do," and them saying, show me the money. Like we just don't have it, right? And then there's this other side, which is marketing and sales. Often is sales teams going, "Where's the leads?" And the marketing's going, "Well, we're giving you leads," and they're like, "The leads are crap," and it's the whole Glenn Ross thing. And so there's this, and we were talking about the need for quarterly versus long term. So I think marketing is in one of those funny spots where you have one foot in the present and one foot in the future. And so we're constantly trying to find ways to invest in the future, but also deliver in the now. And so I would put that in terms of like, do you put all your money into ROI type of activations? Just give me the 50% discount or whatever the thing is that you see all the time on, incentive, like Black Fridays, that kind of thing, to deliver the comps and the sales today, get the leads today, that kind of thing, versus we need to build the brand, drive market penetration in particular areas, build recognition for the products and services. And so I feel like that's a choice that we're often forced to make. And if you don't mind, we could try running through this process.
Yeah, let's give it a try. So what I'm hearing is sort of a fundamental tension between investing in and focusing on the tactics that drive value today, right?
Yep.
So promotion, the shorter run kinds of things that we know have a relatively certain or predictable return on investment. So that's one model. We could put all of our attention, resources, and focus on short run tactics to maximize return today.
Yeah.
Or we could invest in the longer run in slower burn brand building, in future technologies and tactics that will be how value is created years from now, but not yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a real choice that every organization faces, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which of those will it be? And most organizations are like, I will try to do a bit of both, but often the short run is going to win. And when there's a crisis moment, we move a bunch of budget from the long run to the short run, right? And we move people and we say, don't think about that right now. Everything's on fire. Right. So what we would want to do in integrative thinking is to try to fall in love with each of those two perspectives. And so if we start with the short run and we think about us as a company, and we think about, let's imagine that this is a company that has an intermediary, a channel, so a retailer, or right, so as another player, and then there's the end consumer. What you would want to do is say, what would be great about focusing on the short run, focusing on those things that we know are likely to earn a predictable return. What's good about that for us as a company, for our team? What are some of the things that occur to you, Marc? What would you say?
What's good about it, I mean, it solves the problem of revenue that everybody's going after. I'll just carry on with it because you can go. I'm struggling in my mind going down the B2B path versus B2C path, but let's talk about, you mentioned B2C, like a retail environment. So we'll go down that path.
You can do B2B if you prefer. Either way.
Either way. I'm just, in my head, I'm just keep bouncing back and forth, but either way, like like often you can show a result, which is great, because in the now you've got, if you're looking at the short term, you've got money that you're putting in against a particular objective of revenue. And then because you've got that revenue coming back, especially if it was, say, an e-com, or if it was B2B, it'd be like generating leads today. Yeah. You see these leads coming in and you can measure your pipeline that way. So there's an immediate sort of projection that you can apply to the short term.
Yeah. So there's clear results. There's predictability. As you think about the customer, the consumer, the intermediary, like how might they benefit from us taking a very short run, more tactical approach? What would be some of the good things for them?
Well, they feel like, I'll go on the retail side now, because if there's a discount, they feel like, I always think about the value equals benefit minus cost. So they're getting more value because the cost is coming down, and the benefit isn't changing; it's remaining the same. Okay.
And what about the consumer?
Well, that's what I'm saying. On the consumer side, they're spending less, but they're getting great value.
Oh, so gotcha. I was thinking the retailer would appreciate the same, right? Because they too are paying less and getting more value, notionally.
Yeah. So from the consumer side, I think they're getting whatever the thing is that they're looking at, and it's discounted, so they feel that it has bigger value. So they feel they're rewarded almost.
Great. So then, if you were to flip gears and think about investing in the brand for the long run, maybe deprioritizing some of those shorter run tactics and promotions, but really thinking about that longer term equity that you're trying to build, investing in longer term technologies and the future of your business. Again, what would be some of the benefits to taking that approach?
For consumer, I would say some of the benefits. One thing that comes to mind is that there's more from like that brand building side of things. There's more, you get more reach when you do those kinds of things typically. And so on the consumer side, there's a benefit because of the reach that the company's investing in, and they're not looking at sales today. The consumer discovers things they didn't know before. Mm-hmm. So there's new solutions that are out there that are appearing to them that can solve their problems that they didn't know before. So I think that's one of the benefits that consumers who have a problem, they're like all of a sudden, oh, there's this cool new thing that I didn't realize that existed that can help me solve my problem. So that's, I think, part of it from the customer side of things.
Yeah, less incremental, right? It's more likely that you're going to have more breakthrough solutions to jobs to be done. What about for the company? Yeah.
So the company, the benefit there is, I keep thinking about market penetration, where if you're trying to expand your footprint, if you're trying to expand your market share, through that, brand building is the way to do that typically, because you're not worried about the return right away. So you can invest in the future new customers that will generate returns tomorrow, as opposed to the ones that are going to generate returns today.
Yeah. Anything else?
So future cash flow is another way to say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
V, have you got any other thoughts about brand building benefits, either from a customer side or the company side?
It's. I think you covered it, because I came in a little bit late on the conversation, but you're trying to identify like metrics to identify brand.
Just benefits, like from a company's perspective of building a brand or.
Well, longevity becomes one of those things. The mind structures that we've been talking about, and being able to build that affinity is a benefit to the brand. Actually, who was it? It was Jorge and Graham who were talking about, like, it becomes the benefit of brand. It's the shortcut of the brain, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that recall that you're able to have becomes I guess almost the idea of what the brand really is there meant to do. Mm-hmm. Reduce that friction to a product, price, or service.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So if we think about Model A being prioritizing short run tactics to boost revenue in the short run, we're hearing like that can deliver, yes, the benefit of actual revenue. Yeah. I think that it's clarity, it's predictability. There's direct value in the short run to the consumer from a price versus benefit kind of perspective. They feel rewarded. I would also say, if we keep layering onto that, there's agility. You can respond more quickly to changing conditions. There's a responsiveness that happens. And then if we say long run, investing in the brand, investing in those future ways of winning with consumers, we heard greater reach. That's probably more sustainable growth over the long run, greater choice for consumers, more likely to have breakthrough innovation or new solutions that are new jobs to be done. For the company, greater market penetration when you're able to come up with those innovations and those changes. So I think there's sort of a longevity and a sustainability that we're talking about. And so as you start to unpack like what the true benefits are from focusing on the short run and focusing on the long run, the idea is that you're going to start to see there are powerful benefits to both approaches, right? It's not that I can dismiss someone who is making the argument that we need to focus on these short run tactics. And it's not that I can dismiss someone who says, actually, the thing to do is invest in the long run. And then what you want to be able to do is start to examine the models. That's the step 2 of integrative thinking, is to start to say, what assumptions am I making? How do we think about cause and effect here? How are these models similar? How are they different? And so it's really about holding the model's intention and saying, like, what do I notice as I look at these? And so as I just described the benefits of those two models to you, were there things that struck you about how they're similar, how they're different, assumptions we might be making, things that are really valuable from the two models? What comes to mind for you as we articulate those benefits from the two? What comes to your mind?
The one thing that comes to mind is thinking back, because I a little bit, because I having read the book and trying to use it now in my day to day. It's a little bit more about seeing how the sausage is made here. Yeah. So it's kind of like the pro component of examining those, articulating the models. All of a sudden, it's an interesting experience sitting on this side of it, because it's not a fight about which one is better.
Right.
Which is typically where this conversation goes.
Yes.
It's about figuring out what is good about each. And it's very subtle the way you did it, and very skillful the way you did it. But it's an interesting thing, because often that's where this goes. And there's not really space for the fight at the beginning, because it's not about trying to fight which one is best. So Absolutely. That's the first thing that I noticed.
Yeah. V, is there anything that strikes you as you heard me talk about the benefits of the two models? Similar, difference, assumptions, things that you sort of say, here's what's really valuable from each of those two. What comes to mind for you?
I actually love what Marc said. And I think I don't want to use the term like iterative approach, but it's really kind of allowing space to exist for in both instances, right? So when you're thinking about like how you're approaching these models, I think there's value in understanding what is it that you're trying to achieve and how, and then which of the two is actually going to help you get there quicker, if you will. Because I know in the context of business, it is the time is money, right? So I love I don't want to, maybe it's interchangeability, but it's like also the evolution. I don't know. In my mind, I see them like playing together, but also they also work they're very powerful on their own as well.
Absolutely. So if we were doing this in a larger group, we'd start to dig into a conversation about examining the models, where we would raise questions like, someone might say, when I look at the short run, the assumption we're making is that those short run tactics could add up to long-term value. If we question that, like, what if those short run tactics are too scattered and they're distracting us from the long run? How would we think about it? Or we might say, what we believe that focusing on the long run, on the brand, is going to cause greater innovation in the organization, greater ability to come to breakthrough solutions. Right. What if we question that assumption? How might focusing on the short run actually enable us to innovate effectively? And so you would start to explore those questions, break it down, and then get to a place where you say, okay, now that I've done that, I've fallen in love, and then I've started to examine, what could a better answer look like? How might I start to think about a solution or an integration between these? And, I've had conversations about these kinds of tensions before, and sometimes organizations will say, it's really about doubling down on that long-term perspective in a way that enables more effective short-run tactics. So the long run becomes the anchor, and we weigh our short-run tactics against that long-run perspective. Or you might do the opposite. You might say, we are going to focus on immediate consumer needs, what's happening in the market right now, and we're going to have to figure out a way to take the agility and the responsiveness that is created from that and figure out how that can add up to a more sustainable solution over the long run. And you start to imagine and play with, like, what could that look like? How would we build that together? And then the final step of integrative thinking is about saying, how would we test it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one too, because the testing part, I think it's fascinating in that, reflecting what you said early in the conversation, which was, it's not about creating certainty, it's about creating confidence. And so creating a test, and like in marketing, we always do A/B testing, like that's a common thing. Yeah. So in my mind, it's a tool, A/B testing, whether it's or if you want to do like a lift test of some kind, like you can look at paired market testing and create scenarios that are allow you to test these options without, as we were talking about before too, like fail early because it's cheaper rather than commit to something at the end. So I love that idea about that confidence and finding the failure points or finding improvements early rather than waiting till the end and finding out a year from now, if you went all in on the brand building, that a year from now you're like, whoops, we didn't get sales. Or you go all in sales and you're like, whoops, we ran out of customers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Time out.
It's interesting. It's the other thing I found is interesting in that little experiment was, it's a little uncomfortable because you're asking me to, especially because you're asking me very reasonable questions about things that I should know the answer to, and I'm all of a sudden realizing I don't know the explicit way to articulate an answer. It's just I default to something where I'm like, I just know because I know.
I think that's about practice, right? I think that's about you and your team getting more practice at articulating the thinking behind your thinking. I will also say there was a certain falseness where we're recording you by yourself answering this question. So there's a little additional pressure that there wouldn't be in your project team. But it does take some practice. I think you're right. It's not something that we are currently well-trained in doing. And so practicing it is really powerful.
Yeah.
It sucks that I missed it.
Well, you got in right towards the end there, but it was good to have you there. I mean, in the book also, you've got like the TIFF example. There's a bazillion great examples that are super practical. There's Lego. There's a police force training. There's an Apple iPod as an example. Tennis Canada as an example. I mean, Vanguard Group, you were talking about Bogle, right? Not Bogle. Yeah. Unilever. There's so many examples where you've like taken this model and either broken pieces of it and given a specific example how they've done, or done the whole process. So I just found that super interesting, the way you guys had laid out that book.
Thank you.
So this has been amazing. I can't thank you enough for your time. This is just fascinating, and I love the challenge of like thinking about how I think. And finding commonalities with how to create better choices. Mm-hmm. Thinking about the commonalities between each person that's contributing to the idea. So thanks for sharing the book and writing the book and sharing your thoughts and your time. It's just been fascinating.
Well, thank you both. A really enjoyable, absolute pleasure to be with you today.
How can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing, and whether at IDEO or with the book?
Well, so they can buy the book online at all major online retailers. Mm-hmm. Encourage you to do that. And you can find me at IDEO if you're seeking to get in touch with me. That's where I spend most of my time. You can also find me on Twitter, just my name, Jennifer Riel. Those are probably the best ways.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much, Jennifer.
Take care.
And now the post-pod discussion with V and Marc. You want to kick it off?
Post-pod. Here we go. There's the word. There's the P. Post-pod. Let's go.
All right, let's do it, V. So, Jennifer, creating great choices.
I think it was a great choice bringing her on the podcast. Let's start with that.
Yeah, I agree. 100%. Might have been the best choice we made all week.
Fantastic. Like she's, man. And it's funny because when I was looking at, when I understood both, if you will, frameworks at a very high level. But I think the way she really articulated them, actually, it was almost like a little light bulb went off in my head. And I completely now I understand like where each kind of plays in their own space. And I think that's important to say, when you're in those conversations where you're thinking about strategy, when you're thinking about, maybe it's a new product. Well, there's a different framework for thinking about launching something or creating something versus now where you're trying to solve for a problem. And I think I just loved the way she articulated it.
I agree. I mean, there's so many interesting things about it. And one of the bits of research I did, or we both did, looking at, there's this framework about looping back to stance. And so often we just get into these situations where we're like, make a decision, make a choice, make a decision.
Yeah.
It's like, A or B, left or right. Well, and you make, because you have this idea about quick wins and you have to think quickly on your feet and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And what I like about this process is there's always going to be scenarios where you have to make quick choices because you just don't have the time. But probably more often than not, there's more time than you think there is. And so then thinking about how you make the choice is really cool.
Yeah.
There's this diagram that we found called looping back to stance. So you will often go action, outcome, action, outcome, action, outcome. But when you think about your stance that leads to the thinking, that leads to the action, that then leads to the outcome, it's kind of an interesting model in that you don't often spend enough time thinking about why you go to just the choices that you make, and instead think about the I guess the perspective from which you are making those choices.
Yeah.
So I love that part about it because it opens up a lot more opportunity and possibility.
No, it's interesting that you bring up that point there, and I think I don't know if the listeners would have picked up on this, but she also kind of wasn't really a framer, but she talked about the ability to frame the problem, the process around framing the problem, then making the decision, and then the effective action, like 3 key steps, if you will, when you're sitting there and you're trying to strategize. And when we look at that, I guess those 3 steps and the amount of time that it usually is within that, what I loved is the way she really kind of double clicked into the notion that we're not looking to change the amount of time it may take you to go to market with a new strategy or bring a product to life or whatever the case may be. It's about making sure you're doing enough of that work or that pre-work up front, so then you're not adding time to that timetable. So the effectiveness side of this is that you're actually maybe reducing the time to market because you're doing that pre-work. And man, and I know we asked her this, but it was around the notions like, I know you and I have, we've sit in these boardrooms, we've sit in these settings where we're strategizing and we're just going in loops and loops and loops, and we're not going anywhere fast. And maybe it's in those moments where you really have to apply yourself and say, hey, we have to compartmentalize some of these things. Here's a framework that you can really kind of go into and start, really making it more bite-sized for individuals, because how many hours have we wasted? I'm saying this and I feel exhausted saying it because I look back on how many hours I've wasted.
Yeah.
Is that weird? It's weird. I don't know.
No, I totally get it. It's just this morning I was actually for one of my classes. We're not in the same class right now, but I'm in strategic operations, and it's a lot about quality, quality management, total quality management.
Right.
And the question that I was asked this morning is, how do you, or I can't remember exactly how it was phrased, but it was something like, can you inspect quality into a product, or do you have to start with quality in order to manufacture a quality product? And so the theory around that with Deming, who's the guy that was a proponent of this, is that you can't just, start with garbage and then put quality in the inspection process and then make a better product than what you started with.
Right.
So you have to actually start with good stuff in order to get a good outcome or good product or good service.
Right.
And I feel like the description that you just had about, wasting time, it's kind of like start with the good base information, the good base knowledge, the good base options.
Yeah.
And put quality in at the front end of that system, because you can go through the whole thing, like that design thinking squiggle is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And then thrash at the end and then end up with some subpar decision just because you had to make a decision. But if you didn't actually spend the time to think and explore and find the quality materials you needed in order to make the decision, then you end up with something subpar at the end.
I love that. Yeah. No, that's a great example. That's amazing. Yeah. She also talked about, just going over my notes. I think I have like 4 pages of notes. Like, it was just insane. Actually, I did kind of find funny. This is a total caveat when she mentioned that, the idea of having a to-do list and putting something on the to-do list, even though you have already completed it, just so you can have the satisfaction of crossing it out. I thought that was hilarious. That was kind of like, oh, Jesus, that is me to the T. But anyways. Around integrated thinking, and what I liked about, and again, how she really kind of, double clicked into it. It was like, she said, begin with the tension between the ideas. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
It's like when you think about, using that framework of integrated thinking where you're trying to problem solve, really, it's like you're trying to essentially bring to the table as many solutions as possible, and then trying to go through the framework and try to make, find the best solution that everyone could kind of really commit to. But the way she said, begin with a tension between the ideas, it's almost like you're introducing, friction is not the right word, but it's like you're introducing that tension because you want that tension to then actually go through that process of, weeding out what will work and what may not work. And I thought that was an interesting way of positioning it. And I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I was thinking about the pro chart. And what I loved about that is it gives you an opportunity to create that tension, because rather than just dismissing an idea and saying, I don't like that, you're in going back to the Roger Martin thing, falling in love with other people's ideas. It forces that particular tool forces you to think about what's good about something that's not yours.
Yeah.
Right. And so, we all love our own ideas, but especially I love all
my ideas.
But when you stop and think about, when you're forced to not think about what's bad about something else and think instead about what's good about something else, I think it forces you to create that tension in a really practical way. Yeah, which I thought was really interesting about that tool.
I think where we're going to continue to struggle, is because like there's still this sense of, and I think she talked about it being like that the problem is like how our economy has been structured. It's like, how can you actually start enforcing a lot of this change in organizations where you can start thinking a little more long-term, or giving the space to leadership to think more big picture and whatnot versus, quick to action. I think she referred to it as, organizations have become biased to action and to move just quickly, naturally, like keep going. Even if you think about the idea of like agile, like it's that iterative thinking and just like keep moving. So it really plays into this idea, like just doesn't matter. The idea may not be perfect. Just go. And does it result in maybe short-termism, being myopic? Maybe.
Yeah.
But I think like, I want to be careful how I say this, but I think there is still going to be that struggle where organizations are going to force leadership or marketing leaders, or anyone, actually, it doesn't even have to be marketing in this case, to really kind of be quick, think on their feet and just go. And it's hard to use this framework with that, with that reality that we're constantly faced with.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you think about what does it really cost you to spend a couple of, like she mentioned that one example where they'd spent 6 hours over a couple of meetings making a choice. And you mentioned
that's fair.
We've all spent time in just wasting time in different meetings, right? Where if you have a bit of and also you go to these meetings and there's no agenda and there's no like particular outcome that you're looking for from the meeting.
Yeah.
It's just people sitting around talking. So if you structured meetings a little bit differently, which I think this could do.
That's fair. Yeah.
Where the production that you're looking for is a decision, which is the whole purpose of knowledge worker, is to create decisions. Then spending 6 hours seems like almost really no cost at all.
Yeah.
In order to get the assurance or the confidence, not the certainty, but the confidence.
The confidence.
A good choice.
That's a good point, actually.
I think that,
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like I don't know. I just keep thinking about this quality thing. Thinking about maybe it's just top of mind right now, but it really is about, I think, quality choices, not just about just making a choice. Because the knee-jerk reaction is just to go, oh, we got to choose. Let's go, A or B, and then it just, I think it matters to take the time to make sure that it's a good decision.
Well, it's not only let's choose A or B. There's C in there, which C is what did we do last year, right? And it's not even thinking about hey, what are these new ideas that we're potentially working with? It's what's tried, tested, and true. What have we been able to establish over a period of X amount of years that, hey, every time we do this works. And again, we had shared time in retail, and holy smokes, were we constantly looking in the rearview mirror there in terms of did we send an email? Did a flyer go out this week? Everything was based on historical events. All you had to do, you want to understand, actually, for all our listeners out there, if you want to know what the strategy for retail is, sign up for 1 year to their email program, and you'll have their playbook for the next 5 years.
Yeah, just hyperlink every email into a calendar.
Exactly.
They've got their entire playbook.
You'll know exactly what sales are going when.
Yeah,
that's it.
And they do the same thing year over year because there's comps. So you're
exactly
comparing your sales today versus sales last year.
Exactly.
The same day.
It's crazy.
And so all the deals are basically the same because they're just, or maybe they're increasing the discount.
Maybe, yeah. So there may be some subtle, but you can bank on that week 13.
Yeah.
Every year, there's going to be a sale of some sort.
Yeah, like a footwear clearance sale.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, it's true. I mean, there's that. There's the history. And then there's did it work? Which oftentimes isn't really part of the equation. It's just that's what we did. We didn't really even truly track and see if it was incremental to what we would have got anyway.
Yeah. Because it wasn't going off purchase behaviors. And I think there's a general seasonality. If we're going to pick on retail right now, there is a general seasonality. We have back to school, we have, back to specific sports, winter season, all that. So naturally, there's going to be different products that are coming into every season. But think about all the anomalies we had to deal with. Remember that we had a Blue Jays run. All of a sudden, that Blue Jays run during that time really kind of, changed the landscape because we were trying to source Blue Jay jerseys, and it actually overcompensated for another category. I don't remember what other category that wasn't selling well, but we're able to meet comps again. But who's planning for those anomalies?
Yeah. Or we had the one where there was a snowstorm in September and you're we sold out of boots and jackets.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the next year we're oh my God, comps are down. Why
are comps down?
Oh yeah, there was a snowstorm last year, a freak snowstorm.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's those things where it's if you're staying closer to some of those intent signals and understanding the behaviors, you can plan for this a lot differently than what it's historically in a calendar. And I think that's where you can build some agility into your planning processes, your strategy sessions, and whatnot. And again, you have integrated thinking to use, or design thinking to kind of help do that for you.
Yeah, and just to wrap up on that, I do think choosing your future is kind of an interesting idea because it's not just about being on autopilot.
No,
there's a lot of choices, and we kind of, for me anyway, I think oftentimes lulled into thinking that I don't have a choice. Just because of the way things work.
Yeah.
And don't recognize the opportunity of making and choosing a better option.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
I hate the word complacent, but sometimes in these settings, I think as marketers, we become complacent. It's like the business has kind of set this level of expectation that, if you at least do what you did last year, you're fine.
Yeah.
And that doesn't actually put us in that uncomfortable state where we're trying to solve for something net new. And I think that's where the marketers, you'll see like they're constantly moving to different companies, is because at some point they just get tired of being repetitive and they want to be challenged. They want to do something different. They want to, start thinking differently, more creatively, or whatever the case may be. But, you could probably incubate that with an organization and keep people there longer if you give them the autonomy, right?
Yeah, and that's part of, I think, the great thing about creating great choices, that you include people in that process, and it's intended to bring in different points of view, which creates, I think, a bit of an affinity for people to like feel as though they're a part of something and making a contribution because they're part of the choices that are happening. So,
what you just said there,
for such a small, like, when you think, now that we're getting into this, like, for such a relatively, creating great choices, like, it's profound, I think, actually, that it could have such big implications in a company down the road. Or being just like, pick A or B. Well, it doesn't have to be A or B. Well, how do we go to, how do we make a better choice?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you got like this inclusion, that thing that happens, and diversity that, you're counting on and depending on. It's pretty interesting.
It is interesting. If you remember when we were talking to Dave Bunce and, we were trying to kind of articulate how can marketers kind of, involve or bring finance or accounting closer together. It's like involve them in those brainstorming processes and make them a part of the process of what, a marketer goes through to see the end result of a campaign coming live. It's like, well, actually, if you use one of these frameworks, you can involve multiple stakeholders.
Totally.
So I would argue that, this is a way of bringing the organization closer together and rallying around an idea or a problem statement that we're trying to solve for as a group. What is marketing's involvement here? What is finance? How is finance going to help in this situation? Operations, what are you going to do on the front line? All these little things to help solve X. I think that becomes incredibly powerful, and it creates a culture of innovation. And I don't know anyone who doesn't want that.
Totally. V, this has been a great post-pod, man.
Yeah, buddy. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's and thanks to Jennifer for this. This has been awesome.
She was great, Jennifer. Thank you very much for humoring all our questions.
Yeah. All right, man. Until next time.
Sounds good.